conditioned by society or by the conditions on the island or whatever to behave violently, and they're like reacting to their nurture. So it's a classic like nature versus nurture question. Genetically, like at our core, are we aggressive and violent, and society sort of tampers that and tames that? Or are we at our core actually like pretty good, kind people and, you know, altruistic and all of that, and society actually makes us more aggressive and competitive and all of that? And I think in the book, there's a lot of evidence, and even in interviews, William Golding has said, I'm trying to make an allegory about how this is what we are like at our core, that at our core, we are aggressive, kind of nasty people, kind of just nasty creatures, I should say. We're the only creatures that have civil war or whatever, which is not true, actually. Chimpanzees do too. And so some other ants, I think, right? Anyway. We are like, yes, probably a lot. So anyway, he said, like, I'm trying to make an allegory about this is what it's like at our core, that we are aggressive. We need civilization to kind of tame us. And civilization, the way that it's been built, is evidence of our aggression. However, I think that there is evidence here too that it could be some more of civilization kind of like teaching these kids how to behave a little bit. So go to page 13 with me. And this is one of those little bits of evidence, I think. So it says, you can't half swim, Piggy. Piggy took off his shoes and socks, arranged them carefully on the ledge, and tested the water with one toe. It's hot. What'd you expect? I didn't expect nothing. My auntie sucks to your auntie. Ralph did a surface dive and swam into the water with his eyes open. The sandy edge of the pool loomed up like a hillside. He turned over, holding his nose, and a golden light danced and shadowed just over his face. Piggy was looking determined and began to take off his shorts. Presently, he was palely and fatly naked. So mean, always. He tiptoed down the sandy side of the pool and sat there up to his neck in water, smiling proudly at Ralph. Aren't you going to swim? Piggy shook his head. I can't swim. I wasn't allowed. My asthma. Sucks to your ass, Mar. Piggy bore this with a sort of humble patience. You can't half swim well. Ralph paddled backwards down the slope, immersed his mouth, and blew a jet of water into the air. Then he lifted his chin and spoke. I could swim when I was 5. Daddy taught me. He's a commander in the Navy. When he gets leave, he'll come and rescue us. What's your father? Piggy flushed suddenly. My dad's dead, he said quickly, and my mom... He took off his glasses and looked vainly for something with which to clean them. I used to live with my auntie. She kept a candy store. I used to get ever so many candies, as many as I liked. So when will your dad rescue us? As soon as he can. Okay, so last time with Boys Alone, we were talking about how like the restraints of like the experiment could have had more to do with how they behaved than like who they are at their core. And I think we could think about that in this book too. Like in Boys Alone, it kind of seems like, I don't know, when they meet their families at the end, and we only get a couple minutes for this, so I'm probably making judgments, but it kind of seems like Michael's parents are a little bit permissive. Like they're just like, he walks up and they've been watching him on this feed and he was the one to like first destroy everything. He's very obnoxious and they're just sort of like, we love you no matter what, you know? And when everybody was like talking to them and saying, well, we were really annoyed at Michael, she's just like, why would you be annoyed at Michael? You know, that kind of feel. So I'm judging them, I know, but I'm kind of thinking maybe this is one of the reasons that Michael is the way Michael is, you know? Whereas like Sim's mom, like kind of just like quietly like takes, like kind of puts her arm around him and doesn't say anything to him. It never shows that. And so maybe this is an explanation for why Sim is like so quiet in the group too. And like always looking for like alone, like spaces where he can sit alone. So in this page then, what do we see, like, what do you think is the importance of the way these two kids were raised, with Ralph's dad being a captain in the Navy, commander in the Navy, and Piggy being raised by his aunt, and like, it sounds like his mom is either out of the picture or maybe like went a little bit, like got depressed or something after the dad died. Like she doesn't seem to, it seems to be a tender subject, you know? Sammy?
Ralph's father had a leadership position and had this like sense of power and superiority, and I think on the island Ralph wants to mimic that in
Yeah.
especially. So like him kind of seeing his father as a role model and trying to mimic that on the island when he's like,
Yeah.
I'm leader.
What's really interesting is that he doesn't fully say I'm leader. It's everybody else who elects him to be leader. But maybe he's still like Jack says I'm leader, right? Does
No,
Ralph?
At the end,
At the very end.
at the very end when the Navy captain, I noticed this yesterday during the post read, when the Navy captain asked who was in charge, Ralph was like, I am, and he like jumped up and
That's true. So he's like fully embraced that at the end. When they're choosing the leader, does Ralph step up and say, I should be leader? No, but he just starts behaving as one, I think. Like he calls the meeting, he like, and Jack really wants to be leader. Jack's like, I should be, right? I have this like experience being a leader, but everybody else kind of looks to Ralph. So he, at least my impression is that he's a slightly more reluctant leader at the beginning, but that's what makes his leadership more appealing to everyone. But I think you're right, by the end, he's embraced it. And I think even at the beginning, your comment stands because he might just be naturally employing those leadership qualities that he learned from his father to try and live up to that role. Mikkel?
Well, one thing that's interesting is like, Jack was more trying to take it on when it was just the kids, when there was no other authority there. And like, he was like, oh, it's only kids my age, I can take advantage of them.
Yeah.
But Ralph was just kind of like, well, we're all in the same boat, let's all work together. And then as soon as that authority figure comes in, like, I was in charge, I did all of this, I was the responsible one, look up to me and like, give me the credit I deserve for trying to run this pack of wild boys for this long.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like, and it's so interesting the way it describes Jack at the end too. That he's a little boy who wore the remains of an extraordinary black cap on his red hair. Like he's just immediately switched from being this super violent, like villain in the book, into this little boy who's like playing war with his friends by setting the island on fire. Yeah. So okay. So Ralph takes on that role of commander because maybe his dad was a commander. Maybe he's learned behaviors from his dad, right? How about Piggy? Yeah, Sammy.
this is just a little beside the point, but I think Piggy has trauma and uses candy to and uses candy essentially like as a emotional crush.
Could
And maybe
be.
that's why he gained weight.
Could
So I think
be.
it's not nice that the book keeps calling him.
Yeah, I mean, she kept a candy store. I used to get ever so many candies. I don't know that we like know for sure that this is him like trying to deal with grief because, maybe his dad died when he was very, very young. We don't know, right? But the candy is like the way he remembers the past and remembers it fondly and remembers his aunt, and all of this is through these like food memories and like remembering the candies, and like that's one of the reasons why he like respects his aunt is because she like rewarded him for that with candy. Yeah, Christiane.
I think that one of the other things is like his aunt's super protective of him, and that might be because like obviously one of his parents was her sibling, and so like if it's the dead dad and that was like not like an illness or something, she'd be very protective of him.
Yeah.
So
And even if it's not the dad who died, like it could be that it was her brother-in-law who died or whatever, but like you get a kid in your house who's like one of their parents have died, like I think you would be that kind of protective. So what does Piggy learn from that kind of protection? That feeling of protection, I wonder.
He understands like the depth a little more the other kids.
Oh yeah, so he maybe knows the stakes are higher, like maybe knows that they have to be more safe on this island. I like that.
And that's where he's the most pleased.
Yeah. What else could Piggy have maybe like, what kind of characteristics could Piggy have learned from like how protective his aunt is over him? And protective of his feelings, especially. Yeah, Audrey.
Maybe that's like the reason why he's always bringing up like adults, like what would adults do? Because he like looks up to his aunt, like this is what has kept me safe. So he's like, oh, well, my aunt makes me feel safe. You should probably be like my aunt because we're in a dangerous situation.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So what comes across as very whiny and very like, you're just anti-freedom. Like, why can't you just embrace this like really fun situation we're now in? And he's like, what would adults say? Like, we're going to tell adults, or like whenever he kind of like looks to Ralph for authority, like, I've got the conch, Ralph, right? Ralph, tell them to shut up or whatever. His sort of like inherent desire to please authority or to follow authority seems to come from this experience with his auntie, who is like giving him candy when he does so. That's great. That's an awesome reward. Or being like protective of him in like really difficult situations. There's also something here about the way Piggy was raised by women, and or Ralph was raised by the person that Ralph mentions is a man. I think that the book is saying something about that too. Yeah.
I think part of like Ralph's aggression comes from it's like mainly male, and masculine authority that he was raised with. Whereas, like Piggy was raised with like a more feminine, I don't know,
Yeah.
like feminine authority, and stereotypically more like stereotypically matriarchal authorities tend to be more like compassionate, caring, and like sensitive to your.
Right. And we get the feeling here that Ralph's dad I don't get the feeling he was a bad dad. I mean, he at least taught him how to swim, so he's spending like time with him, right? But Ralph has this masculine authority figure to look up to, and he's like, this is my sort of my stereotype of leadership, or these are the qualities of a leader that I live for, right? And he's trying to emulate those. I think the book is saying that those are good leadership qualities. I think the stuff that Ralph is trying to, he's not always successful, but the way that Ralph tries to lead the boys, I think that the book is saying, like, if Ralph could have led them and we didn't have this influence from people like Jack, little psychopaths like Jack, then it could have been okay on this island, right? Oh, okay. He's a murderer, but all right. I guess he's not the murderer. Roger's the murderer. Roger's the real psychopath. Jack is just power hungry. Let's talk about why you relate to Jack here in a second, because I think many of us probably could in some ways. Hang on. So with Piggy, though, I think that this book is, I think Lord of the Flies is a little bit of a, not misogynist, I'm not saying that. I think it's a bit of a sexist book in this way. I think there's little evidence of when it's like, oh, if like women wouldn't have gotten into this situation. So maybe it's that benevolent sexism where it's like, well, women would have been smart and kind and caring to each other, and they wouldn't have called each other piggy and so on. But there's like this, and in his interview, he says, well, girls never would have gotten into this situation. Like, girls would have been so good. And so I think like the idea of the matriarch like guiding Piggy, I think it is both like, hey, look, like they were very logical, they were very protective and caring of him, but also a little bit whiny, a little bit like, ooh, I'm gonna break a nail type of attitude, So there's this way that Piggy's singled out for being too feminine in this survival space too. Ben?
I also think that it's kind of interesting that Piggy is one of the smartest characters, because maybe he was raised by his aunt, but that also gave him more perspective on life.
Yes.
To think that he should be more self-reliant almost. But it's also kind of strange because he's one of the most whiniest characters.
Yeah.
So maybe the fact that he was raised by his aunt provides this sort of.
What would the critique be, do you think?
I think that maybe men are more brash, they're more rude, but women are more introspective.
Yeah, I think so. If Piggy is representative of a more feminine character, but they also might be incapable of survival on their own too, because there's that part where Ralph is like, I know Piggy's the smartest. Inside that fat head of his, as he says, that fat head, he's got lots of good ideas. And now that I'm a leader, I can recognize good ideas. So it's like Piggy would be a great like advisor, a consigliere, like that's good for Piggy, but not necessarily a leadership role. Audrey.
That like reminds me of like the idea that like behind every great man is a great woman. 'Cause it's like, you
I
know,
think this book
Einstein
believes in
got a
that
lot of
idea.
ideas from his wife.
Yeah.
A lot of famous men got a lot of ideas from their
Have Scott
wives.
Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
They say Zelda might have basically written Great Gatsby. I don't necessarily believe that theory, but yeah, exactly. So there's like, I think this book is like, isn't that a great place for Piggy if we could appreciate him? But they don't appreciate what he offers to the situation. Yeah, Sammy?
Doesn't also at the end, it kind of describes Piggy as like the representing, Piggy kind of represents innocence in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, in doing that, you could theoretically like equate femininity and like he was so like flustered to take his clothes off and stuff.
Yeah, he's more modest too. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah, Michaela?
What I also think is really interesting is we know he's the one that can like survive on his own.
Do you think Piggy could?
No.
If there was nobody else around, he would have the genius idea to be like, okay, this berry is safe for me to eat. I can start a fire with my glass. And he would like last the longest. It might not look like he would, but he would just have like the smartest little ideas. But he's the most dependent on other people. He's like, I need other people or I'm gonna die. And like he's not confident in himself. I think part of his dependence on others is because he's lost people in the past. So I think that's really interesting because they present him as a smart character with all these great ideas that help him survive.
But
But then he's really dependent.
he's desperate to join the group.
And then like the contrast to that is Jack with how like he's always going off and hunting. But if Jack were on his own, he would just focus on hunting and then he'd starve to death because he couldn't catch a pig.
And because, yeah, you need to have a whole group to catch the pig. That's interesting. So the introspective wise character might have more of a chance of survival on his own. But when you're in a group dynamic, it's the bloodthirsty hunter character that can survive. Yeah.
I don't think Piggy could actually, even though theoretically he could survive being the longest from his like ideas, he's so timid in that sense.
You might just sit there and cry.
Yeah, I don't think he would be able to like put himself together and go, okay, I need food, water, shelter, I'm gonna go hunt for food. I
Yeah.
don't think he would wanna act, like, I feel like him actually, if he was on his own, hunting a pig would really upset him. He would call.
Yeah. I wonder if Piggy and Ralph, though, just the two of them, that team up probably would have had the best chance. Asher?
I never really understood why exactly they want to hunt. It's not entirely necessary for anything they're doing there.
So they're getting sick from the berries. They need some source of food, right? But you're right. They could have figured out the fruit situation a little bit
The
better.
fact that, like 3 times, there's a war
Or
happening
fishing.
above them, like 3 times while they're here, they are almost saved. If they could just like focus on that, they could survive on berries long enough.
Yeah, but the
That's well
hunting, I
said.
think, is a really important part of this, which is that, is it really for the meat and sustenance? Or is it because killing things seems fun? And that's where we get back to this question of nature versus nurture. So here's their nurture coming through. They've got these characteristics kind of imparted on them from civilization, right? From the way they were raised, we could say. But then there's this stuff about this bloodthirsty quality that they just want to murder something. And it's like the boys with the hedgehogs, like they don't need the hedgehog for food, but they start hunting the hedgehog in Boys Alone, you know, and that's the one time the camera crew has to step in and be like, we don't want animal cruelty on the show, you know? So there's this like something at the core of these boys that is like, I want to exert dominance and power over something else. Yeah.
That being said, Jack got the knife from somewhere that was not the island, and I'm guessing that it was like a gift from someone.
Great point.
Because, like, where else would you have gotten that knife?
So is this civilization then like handing boys knives and saying, go do what you got to do? Is this something from civilization that has taught them this? Because after all, this is written in 1954, and it's in the midst of what seems to be World War II. These boys are familiar with war. They know about atom bombs. This is like a continuation of the war, I'm not sure. They are like in a civilization where war has been effective and war has been all around them. So maybe they're picking up this idea that we need to kill things to exert power from civilization as well. Yes, Em.
What was I gonna say? First of all, it is 1954, so that's World War II.
It's about 10 years after World War II.
Yeah.
So it's like Cold War.
Mhm. I think it's supposed to be probably towards the end of World War II.
Yeah. They know about the atom bomb, so I wonder if this is like a fictional war that has cropped up because of the Cold War and the fear of the Cold War afterwards. But yeah, in the end, when you get this like commander coming in, it's like, here's the presence of violence that has been in their lives all along.
And I think that's part of the reason they act out is they're surrounded by so much fear of violence and fear of acting out, but they don't actually get to do anything about it. And once they're in this island, in this secluded space, they finally act out on that fear.
Yeah.
And kind of try it out and be like, oh, this is what all the violence threats are about. And like, why?
This is,
I don't know.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
but,
yeah.
You know, having the threat is kind of scary. So the fact that they can finally kind of act out on it is why they go so crazy.
okay. Speaking of that, that's a great segue. Got an iceberg. It's gorgeous. And let's say there's kind of like a warm water up here, and then it's like colder down here. You've got a little section like this. You've got a section like this, although that's kind of big. Okay, this is the Freudian psyche. So this is what makes up your identity. Freud's ideas are sometimes a little wacky. If you've learned a little bit about Freud, he's the guy with the, the Oedipus complex and how every little boy really is in love with their mother, and all of that junk, right? But his idea of the conscience, have we talked about conscious, unconscious? Have I showed you this iceberg before? Sometimes I have deja vu from videos. Okay. His idea of the conscious and unconscious is like one of the most influential ideas of, the last 100 years. Like this is like been completely accepted by everyone pretty much as being truth of how like our psychology works. And so let's talk about how this goes. This is under here. Oh, up here is consciousness. This is what we can actually think about. This is what is on the surface and we can bring up. So these are like, recent memories. It's like stuff that we've kind of incorporated into ourselves as being like very, very important. All of that. This is our knowledge that we can recall at any moment. This down here is called pre-consciousness. Consciousness. Like the waters down here. This is stuff that we could bring up if we were asked to. Like someone was like, Dad, remember something that happened from when you were 6? And you're like, oh, vaguely, I can kind of bring that up to the surface. Or remember something from your world history class last year. Okay, it's like, it's vague, but it's like kind of there. I can kind of access it. And under here is the unconscious. You can't access this on your own. Like you could potentially, for Freud, you could do this in hypnosis. You could do this like through like intense psychotherapy. But for the most part, this is like completely not accessible to us anymore. Like we can't remember these things. This is like sort of drives that we have deep down, things that we've repressed potentially, or things that we were just like too young and we've grown so much since then. There are 3 parts to our psyche. There is what is called the id. There is the superego. Is it supposed to be on the surface? It's kind of like not perfect, like that. Superego. And then there is the ego. So let me make this clear with my lines here. Here are the lines. And our psyche is made up of these 3 elements. The id is completely unconscious. This is our innate desires. This is like we have desires to be completely selfish. These are like, Freud is obsessed with this, so he talks about it all the time. These are our sexual desires, but these are also our aggressive desires. And Freud says at our heart, at our core, deep down, we are all extremely aggressive because we want to act out on and get our selfish desires. We want to be able to act in whatever way we want to get whatever we want. This is that id. The superego is like social learning. So this is like where our morality lies. This is where taught like rules and expectations are. So if you are religious, that is where the superego, that's what the superego is, like all of these sort of like morals that you have been taught, or like I don't know, yeah, rules that you've been taught. It's like in society, the rules that we've taught just to like learn how to behave. Like you go to kindergarten, right? And before you get to, if you're like an only child, let's pretend you're an only child, and you get to kindergarten, you're almost all id at that point. Your parents maybe have tried to teach you rules about engaging in society, but like if you're an only child, that's tough. You get into kindergarten and they teach you how to share, and they teach you how to sit still, and they teach you how to raise your hand. All of that is the super ego. So this is kind of like imposed on us. And some of that is repressed and we don't even realize we've been taught that stuff. Some of that is still conscious. Like we know that these are the rules that have been kind of imposed on us. And lastly is the ego. And this is the regulation between superego and id. So we've got these two parts of us. It's like our nature to be aggressive and selfish. And then it's the superego that says, no, you need to be altruistic. You need to be caring of others, all of that. And the ego says, okay, in some situations, I'm going to listen a little bit more to the id. In some situations, I'm going to listen a little bit more to the superego. And this is where like most of our conscious identity comes from. So who we are and how we behave is mostly this regulation between the superego and the id. All right. Does that make sense, kind of? How our psyches work? How many of you have seen this kind of model before and talked about id, ego, superego? That's interesting. Okay, cool. So it's a cool idea. I don't know that we all believe it. I don't know. Do you think at your core you're aggressive and horrible, or do you think at your core you're actually like a good, like not solid citizen, but that you like would want to do things like nice for other people? You're naturally altruistic. Like, for example, anarchists completely reject this model. Anarchists say it's actually our super ego that is making us selfish and competitive, and it's like all the rules of society and capitalism and all of that actually makes us horrible, and our id is actually really kind and wants to connect with people and so on. And that's why if you get rid of government, we'll all just live peacefully. That's the anarchist point of view. So not everybody accepts this, but it has been like largely accepted. Freud says society is a necessary part to living, like the rules of the superego is a necessary part of living in a society, but it makes us unhappy because at our core, we want to be selfish. Selfishness equals happiness. But we have to repress all of that selfishness in order to be a good member of society. And he says we make that exchange for a couple reasons. One, because we need safety, and there's safety in numbers. So if we all just lived alone as hermits in the woods, we maybe get to act aggressively all we want, but we don't get that sense of safety, right? The other thing is we got to procreate. And if we're hermits in the woods, we can't find, the girlfriend or boyfriend to procreate with, So because that's what he always talks about. So he says we have to be part of society, but we trade off so much happiness to be a part of society because this superego is always trying to get in our way. Okay, so what I want you to do in pairs or in your little groups, I want you to decide which character represents which, because I think Golding is thinking specifically about Freud. I think he's like in 54, everyone was. And I think that he's saying that some characters he's allegorical. So some characters are like fully ego, fully id, fully superego. See which characters fit where. Okay, have a discussion.
I think Simon would probably be super ego because he's not regulating anything. He's more altruistic than regulating. Plus, everything you read about Simon online is that Simon is representative of Jesus and religion fits in his superego.
His first son. So they're trying to kill. Honestly, he died divine. Yeah, Jesus died divine. It was less violent, but it's more. It was just kind of torture. Yeah, it was just kind of wasn't it? Yeah. Because they're letting him bleed out. Yeah, it was kind of boring. He's alive for hours after. Oh, okay.
So when he's up on the cross, he's just hanging by his wrist.
What are you guys talking
I'm
about?
talking about the crucifixion.
Okay.
And how
Simon
they-
represents
And
religion.
nobody talks about that.
Once you've decided on your characters, I want you to decide on which symbol from the novel represents which, because I think the characters are symbolic, and then he has these physical objects in the book that could probably represent each of these things too. So, you know, the conch, the glasses, the fire, the beast, there's the Lord of the Flies, there's so many of these. See which symbol represents each.
Maybe the conscious ego.
Conscious ego is the regulate.
Yeah.
The superego is probably the fire.
Yeah.
Because it kind of has aspects of, well, no.
Glass is
Which
just
part is
like,
like the fire and the
just
end?
safe. but only for a few minutes.
Wait, no, it could be the-
Like for most of the book, fire is a good thing.
I think.
The biggest source of
glass
conflict.
is, make desires because everyone likes the glass. Like, there's the glass. because the,
That's it. And then I feel like the pieces are super creating like something small.
Don't touch my spoon.
Okay, now last bit, this is the difficult bit. You're gonna try and figure out how these characters and these symbols, how the way that they end up, like the way that they start versus the way that they end up, what that says about this construction of id, ego, superego. So think about our characters that represent each, think about where they start versus where they end up, and decide as a book, what is this, or decide what the book is trying to say about this psyche. Does that make sense? A little bit? Okay, go for it.
I think it's notable that wait, no, it wasn't.
But in the end, I think he's saying that the superego is fighting for because
Yeah.
no. Probably still like.
When the Lord of the Flies is destroyed, wasn't something else destroyed at the same time? Yeah. So it'd be like,
The ego and the id.
so in that situation, the
By
conscious
the
would be like,
superego.
the conscious is the ego at the start, but it turns into superego as a simple power. And later, like the last, the ego.
But I still think if we went with fire.
Yeah.
Then fire or like.
So in the end, the
Even though Pinky died.
Because they don't have any regulation at the end. And they don't really want anything at the end.
All right, ultimately, what were you guys saying about the way that this book ends up? What is it trying to say about how our psyches work? Had some good ideas I was overhearing. Yeah,
you
Christina.
can't get rid of things entirely, like you decided that he was a super ego, but at the end Jack is still holding glasses. And
Interesting.
like the conch is like a representative ego, but Ralph is too, and you don't have the conch anymore, but Ralph is still alive. So
I love that. So it's like maybe there's no way that one of these things can be repressed so fully that it like completely disappears. There's always going to be like traces of one or the other, but that in certain circumstances, things like the id could grow. Maybe the id could even grow into consciousness, you know, where it's like all you're doing is acting on the id, and the superego gets really small, but it is still there. You can't just completely escape. Like you're learning from society. I like that. Yeah. What else do you think about this, the way that the book is dealing with this concept? Yeah, Ben.
And said that the island represents society and natural.
Interesting.
actions. but
Yeah.
Since the island is in flames, but
Right. Okay, I love this idea of the island being ego, though. I've never thought of that before, but it makes sense to me. If civilization is the super ego and the boys then are completely id, right? And the island would be the regulation between civilization and the id. And so like them trying to survive on this island is like the island trying to regulate between the two, but you're saying the island ends up in flames, meaning the id can pretty easily take over. The id, and I think that is kind of what he's saying here about how easy it could be for the id to kind of, decide like, to hell with civilization. It's all about me now. It's all about like my power and my, not even power all the time. Like, it's just like my aggression. I just want to act it out. Like Roger is never looking for power. I don't think him like, throwing rocks at Piggy is not him saying like, no, we want us to be in charge. I think Roger just likes throwing rocks at people. And he's like, and he's decided like, I get to act that out here, So I think Piggy is the most obvious representation of the super ego because he is constantly bringing in the kind of rules of society, saying like, but my auntie says, what will adults think, and so on. I think the ego is the most obvious representation of ego is probably Ralph as he tries to regulate between Jack and Piggy. And then the id, I think like the obvious character, the one who is like the most on the forefront is Jack. But I wanted to get back to this idea about relating to Jack. Jack also brings in parts of civilization though, right? Because at some point someone has said, Jack, you're the special kid, you lead the choir boys. He's got real gifted kid gone wrong energy where it's like, all my life I've been told I'm the best choir boy, so here on the island I should be the best too. Why isn't everyone listening to me? Once you get out there into a job or whatever, it's like, I was the gifted kid. Why aren't people respecting me? Yeah, Christiane.
We actually decided that Roger was the most accurate representation of the id.
Yeah, because he doesn't have any of, like, he seems to be pure chaos.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think he is a better representation of that. I think it kind of feels like William Golding slapped him in to be like, this would be what it is like to have full id. Maybe Jack is a little bit more, has more id than other people, but Roger is like the psychopath. Yeah.
He's like throwing rocks the whole time.
I know, he starts by throwing rocks. Yeah.
What if I just
Like, it's like he's been back home, like constantly being like, I just wish I could throw rocks and like waiting for this situation.
I wish I could enact my blood loss.
Yeah.
Just waiting,
Is
just
it
waiting
in the
for this
middle of
moment.
math class, like rocking back and forth?
Just
Just
like-
like rocks.
Okay.
Rocks, I wanna throw the rocks.
Trigger warning, I am passing out the lined paper. Because we are gonna do a short passage essay now. So take 2 pages each. I should have warned you about this ahead of time so you can be mentally prepared. So we've been practicing these short passage essays. We didn't get to our practice last time, but you did do the prompt for today, which was a practice for the short passage. We gotta wrap up on Lord of the Flies here. You've got an essay to write, not next time, but the time after that is due. And it is like a short passage where you choose from different passages that I give you to write the essay on these short passages. I think next time, I lied. We're not completely done with Lord of the Flies because next time we've got to talk about that scene between Simon and the Lord of the Flies. I just ran out of time today. So we will get to that because it's a little bit wild. But we're going to be moving into review time and like kind of crunch time for the test. We only have, after today, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 class periods before that May 4th test date. So if you're taking it on May 4th, we got 5 class periods. It's coming so fast. So we've got to do a short passage practice. So I'm passing it out, leave it upside down. So remember the goals of this are to find some kind of theme in the passage. You'll be limited because you've never read this book before. Has anyone read The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle? Meaning-
Right.
Yeah.
So I was like, the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
So
And then,
you've never read this passage before, you have very little to go off, and you have to figure out what's like a theme that is kind of in this passage. I'll tell you right now, it's gonna be something about masculinity. It shows it to go along with Lord by a little bit. And you're looking for details in the text that support that theme. So actually, I'd like, flip it back over. Let's read the prompt together, since you haven't seen one of these before. So it says, in the passage below from The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle from 1751 by Tobias Smollett, Mr. Pickle encounters Godfrey Gauntlet, the brother of his beloved Amelia. So Mr. Pickle and Amelia are dating, and Godfrey Gauntlet is the brother. Consider how the two men confront their own uncontrolled emotions, and yet attempt to abide by their social norms. So you might find the discussion we just had, I mean, it's a very different atmosphere, but the discussion we just had is definitely relevant to this. In a well-developed essay, analyze how the author explores the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage. You may wish to consider such literary techniques as dialogue, narrative pace, and tone. So often these passages will give you a little bit of a hint about what literary techniques you could talk about: dialogue, narrative pace, and tone. You wouldn't want to just say, I'm going to talk about dialogue, narrative pace, and tone. They're giving you broad suggestions. You want to find the patterns within those things. So dialogue that is, subtle but passive aggressive, or pace that moves very quickly and then slowly, or the opposite, or whatever, or the tone, name the exact tone. You also are not limited to talking about those three things. If you find something else that's interesting here, like maybe the narration or maybe like the description, you can always talk about something else. And even if you talked about none of those three things, you could still discuss this. So you're trying to write the theme. You're trying to identify literary qualities, and then remember what we've been practicing about breaking down the essay by theme. And one way to do that is kind of starting with something you could talk about at the beginning of the passage and moving through it as you move through your essay, rather than going from, here's my paragraph on dialogue, here's my paragraph on narrative pace, which creates this kind of list. So that's all review from what we've been talking about. Does anyone have any other questions before I get you started on this? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Are we allowed to use a different color pen?
You can use blue or black on the AP test, but I don't mind whatever color you want to use. It's fine with me. Okay, then you have 40 minutes for this. We'll have 5 minutes to debrief at the end of class. Ready, set, go.